I worked hard, took on every responsibility, and trusted my company completely. One conversation I was never meant to hear changed everything. I did not start my career trying to be a hero. I just wanted to be solid, dependable, the kind of guy who shows up early, does what needs doing, and goes home knowing he earned his paycheck. My dad raised me on the idea that hard work speaks for itself. You keep your head down, you give more than you take, and eventually someone notices. Opportunity follows effort. Respect follows consistency. That belief sat deep in my chest, like a rule of gravity. My first real job out of college was at a mid-sized logistics company in Ohio. Nothing flashy. Beige cubicles, humming lights, coffee that tasted burnt no matter who made it. I was 24, hungry, and scared of screwing it up. On my first week, I stayed late without being asked just to make sure a shipment report was clean. I remember the quiet of the office after everyone left, the way the building felt like it was holding its breath. When my manager emailed me the next morning to say he appreciated the extra care, something clicked. That little hit of validation felt better than the paycheck. From there, it became a pattern. I volunteered for tasks no one wanted. I fixed broken processes that technically were not my problem. I answered emails on weekends. When something went wrong, I stepped in before anyone asked. It felt good to be useful. It felt even better when people started to rely on me. At first, the praise came easy. Managers would mention my name in meetings. Coworkers thanked me in passing. I got labeled as dependable, which I wore like a badge. Being reliable became my identity. If someone needed help, I was the guy. If something was urgent, it landed on my desk. I told myself this was how you proved yourself. This was how careers were built, brick by brick, late night by late night. There were moments that felt like confirmation. A performance review that called me essential. A casual comment about future leadership potential. A promise that when the next opportunity opened up, I would be considered. I replayed those words in my head during long evenings alone at my desk, convincing myself that every extra hour was an investment. What I did not notice then was how quietly the ground was shifting under my feet. The extra work stopped being extra. It just became expected. The thanks came less often. New tasks appeared without explanation, as if they had always been mine. When I finished them, more followed. I did not push back. I told myself patience mattered. I told myself real recognition takes time. Still, late at night, staring at my screen while the cleaning crew moved through the office, a strange thought started creeping in. A soft, uncomfortable question I kept shoving aside. What if being needed was not the same thing as being valued? I ignored it and kept typing, unaware that the moment forcing me to face that question was already being set in motion. The thing about being dependable is that it sneaks up on you. One day you are just helping out, and the next day you are the foundation everything rests on. After my first year, people stopped double-checking my work. They just assumed it was right. If there was a rush project, my name came up without discussion. I would walk into the office and find sticky notes on my monitor, emails already waiting, calendar invites dropped onto my schedule without anyone asking if I had time. Somehow, my time was always assumed to be available. At first, I took it as a compliment. Being trusted felt good. Being needed felt even better. I liked the quiet respect that came with it. Not loud praise, not awards or bonuses, just this unspoken understanding that I was the guy who could handle things. When others panicked, they looped me in. When deadlines slipped, I stayed late and made them right again. Managers started leaning on me in subtle ways. They would ask me to take a look at something, which really meant fix it. They would include me in meetings above my pay grade, then ask me afterward to summarize action items and follow up on all of them. I told myself this was exposure. This was preparation. This was how they tested future leaders. I started coming in earlier without noticing, leaving later without thinking. My life shrank down to the office glow and the drive home in the dark. Friends stopped inviting me out because I usually said no. Family dinners got rescheduled around my workload. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Just one more push. Just one more quarter. There were moments when doubt flickered, but I smothered it fast. When a new hire with less experience asked why I always handled the toughest problems, I laughed it off. When someone joked that the place would fall apart without me, I smiled, even though the comment sat heavy in my stomach. I told myself I was building leverage. The first real crack showed up during a reorganization. Titles shifted. Responsibilities got shuffled. A few people got promotions announced in an all-hands meeting. I watched from my seat, hands folded, waiting to hear my name. It did not come. Afterward, my manager pulled me aside and thanked me for holding everything together during the transition. He said promotions were complicated, budgets were tight, timing mattered. He said my patience would not go unnoticed. I nodded. I always nodded. That night, alone in the office again, I looked around at the empty desks and felt something I had not felt before. Not anger, not sadness, just a dull confusion. I was doing more than ever, solving bigger problems than ever, carrying weight that used to belong to entire teams. So why did it feel like I was standing still? I pushed the thought away, reopened my laptop, and stayed another hour. Because that was who I was. The reliable one. The guy who did not complain. What I did not know was that, while I was proving myself over and over, a decision about my future had already been made without me in the room. The second year was when the illusion really started to crack, even though I refused to admit it at the time. They did not promote me, but they gave me everything that came with a promotion except the title and the pay. I started training new hires. I reviewed other people's work before it went upstairs. I sat in meetings where decisions were made, then got tasked with making those decisions actually work in the real world. When something failed, eyes drifted toward me. Not accusing, expectant. I told myself this was trust, that they were easing me into something bigger. I even liked the responsibility, at least at first. It made me feel grown, important, like I finally mattered in a place that had consumed most of my waking hours. Then came the first real twist. A new manager joined our department. His name was Eric. Friendly guy, polished. He had that calm confidence that comes from never having to fight for a seat at the table. On his first week, my boss asked me to walk him through our systems. I spent days explaining workflows I had built myself, problems I had already solved, shortcuts I had learned the hard way. Eric listened closely, took notes, asked smart questions. He thanked me more than once, said he appreciated how thorough I was. I walked out of those sessions feeling oddly proud, like I had just passed some kind of test. 2 months later, Eric was introduced in a company-wide email as the new team lead. I remember staring at the screen, rereading the announcement, waiting for it to change, waiting for a follow-up that explained how this made sense. It never came. Instead, my calendar filled up with meetings Eric scheduled. Meetings where he asked me for updates. Meetings where I explained progress on projects I was still fully responsible for. Nothing about my day-to-day changed, except now I reported to someone I had trained. I told myself not to take it personally. They needed leadership experience. Eric had the title. I had the knowledge. Together, it worked, right? That was the story I fed myself to keep the resentment from bubbling up. But little things started stacking up. Eric got credit for improvements I had implemented months earlier. In meetings, he would summarize my work as if it were a team effort, which really meant his leadership. When praise came down from above, it landed on his shoulders and stopped there. One afternoon, a coworker pulled me aside and casually asked how it felt to be the backbone of the team. He said it like a joke, but his eyes were serious. For the first time, I did not laugh it off. The word backbone stuck with me all day. Backbone support. They do not move forward. They just hold everything up. That night, driving home in the dark, I felt something new creeping in. A quiet anger, mixed with embarrassment. I had given them everything. Time, energy, loyalty, and somehow, I had trained myself into a corner. Still, I went in early the next morning. Still stayed late. Still told myself this was temporary. Because admitting the truth would have meant admitting that the system was not built to reward people like me. And I was not ready for that yet. By the third year, my job description existed only in theory. In reality, I did whatever needed doing, whenever it needed doing, and usually before anyone else realized it was a problem. I was the first call when something broke and the last one still logged in at night. When people went on vacation, their responsibilities quietly slid onto my plate. When deadlines got aggressive, I absorbed the pressure. I stopped counting hours because counting made it feel real, and I did not want to look too closely at what my life had turned into. The unexpected twist came disguised as trust. Eric started looping me into conversations he said were above my level. Strategy talks, budget planning, long-term roadmaps. He would say things like, "You have a good head for this," or "Leadership notices your reliability." I walked out of those meetings feeling seen again, like maybe this was the long game finally paying off. Then he asked me to take over a failing project. Not temporarily. Fully. It had missed deadlines, gone over budget, and burned through 2 previous owners. He framed it as a chance to prove myself under pressure. He said if anyone could turn it around, it was me. I did not hesitate. That was my mistake. I threw myself into it like everything else. Nights blurred together. Weekends disappeared. I rebuilt timelines, smoothed vendor relationships, fixed internal bottlenecks that had nothing to do with the project but somehow were now my responsibility. Slowly, painfully, it started working. People noticed again. Senior leadership praised the turnaround. Emails came down the chain calling it a success story. I waited for the follow-up, the acknowledgement, the reward. What came instead was silence. No title change, no raise, no conversation about next steps. Just a new project assignment dropped into my inbox the following Monday, even more complex than the last. The failing project was no longer mine because it was no longer failing. I remember sitting at my desk that morning, staring at the new task list, feeling something snap quietly inside me. Not loudly. No dramatic moment. Just a soft realization settling into place. I was not being tested anymore. I was being used. That thought scared me, so I argued with it. I told myself this was how trust worked. That leaders were built through sacrifice. That recognition would come when the time was right. I had invested too much to question the return now. Then I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. 2 managers talking near the break room. They mentioned how efficient it was having me handle the heavy lifts. One of them joked that I saved them the cost of hiring 2 more people. They laughed. Not cruelly. Casually. Like it was obvious. I stood frozen around the corner, coffee cooling in my hand, listening to my value reduced to a line item. That night, for the first time in years, I did not stay late. I went home at a normal hour and sat in the dark of my apartment, trying to figure out when exactly being dependable had turned into being disposable. What I did not realize was that the real test of my loyalty was still coming, and it would not ask politely. The test came wrapped in flattery. Eric stopped by my desk late one afternoon, leaning against the cubicle wall like he had all the time in the world. He said leadership had a problem. A big one. A client issue that had blown up quietly and was now threatening to explode publicly. Missed deliverables. Angry emails. The kind of situation that made executives nervous. He said my name came up in the room. Not officially, of course, but people knew I was the fixer. He asked if I could help. Just temporarily. Just to steady things until they figured out next steps. He said it would mean late nights. Maybe a few weekends. He promised it would be remembered. I felt tired before I even answered, but the old reflex kicked in. This is how you prove yourself. This is how you show leadership without the title. I said yes before he finished explaining. The project swallowed me whole. It was worse than anything I had touched before. Half-finished work. Conflicting expectations. A client who had been promised things that were never possible. I became the buffer. The translator. The guy who absorbed the anger so everyone else could stay clean. I joined calls at dawn and stayed logged in past midnight. I wrote long, careful emails designed to calm people down without admitting fault. I cleaned up mistakes I did not make and took responsibility for decisions I was never part of. The twist came when the client praised the turnaround directly to senior leadership. They sent an email thanking Eric by name for stepping in and providing strong direction during a difficult moment. My name was not mentioned once. Eric forwarded me the message with a short note saying great job, could not have done it without the team. Team. Singular. Me. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling something hollow open up in my chest. This was not an accident. This was a pattern. I was not invisible. I was deliberately unseen. A week later, during a budget meeting I was invited to but not meant to speak in, I heard something that finally snapped the last thread holding my denial together. They were discussing headcount, costs, efficiency. Someone mentioned how lucky they were to have certain people who did not need incentives to go above and beyond. Someone else said my name and laughed lightly, saying I was low maintenance. Low maintenance. That was it. That was my reward. Not growth. Not opportunity. Just convenience. I went back to my desk and did my work like always. But something fundamental had shifted. I stopped volunteering. I stopped fixing problems that were not assigned to me. I started leaving on time, even when it felt wrong. No one said anything at first. Then things started breaking. Deadlines slipped. Emails piled up. Small fires turned into big ones. People looked around, confused, like a safety net had been quietly removed. Eric stopped by again, concern replacing confidence. He asked if everything was okay. He asked if I was still committed. I told him I was doing exactly what my role required. Nothing more. Nothing less. The silence that followed was loud. What I did not know yet was that my loyalty had already been replaced on paper, and the defining moment that would make everything clear was already scheduled on the calendar. The meeting invite showed up on a Tuesday afternoon with no explanation. Just a vague subject line and a short list of attendees that included names I had only ever seen in company-wide emails. Senior people. Decision people. My first thought was relief. Real, almost embarrassing relief. I told myself this was it. This was the moment where everything finally got acknowledged. All the late nights. All the invisible labor. All the times I said yes when it cost me something. You do not get pulled into a room like that unless something important is about to happen. I spent more time than I want to admit getting ready that morning. I ironed my shirt. I showed up early. I sat at the conference table with my notebook open, trying to keep my expectations in check while my heart raced anyway. Eric came in last and gave me a quick nod. Not friendly. Not cold. Just neutral. That should have been my warning. The meeting started with updates. High-level stuff. Metrics I knew better than anyone in the room, being summarized by people who had never touched the actual work. I listened quietly, correcting nothing, waiting for my turn. Then the tone shifted. They started talking about the future. Restructuring. Efficiency. Streamlining roles to better align with growth. Corporate language so smooth it barely sounded human. One of the executives said something about recognizing contributions while also making hard decisions. I felt a tightness in my chest that I could not explain. That was when they said my name. Not with praise. With appreciation. They talked about how much I had done for the company. How reliable I had been. How instrumental I was during difficult periods. It felt like a eulogy delivered while I was still breathing. Then they explained that the team lead role Eric held was being expanded. More authority. More visibility. And that to support that, my responsibilities would officially be absorbed under his position. Absorbed. They framed it as an opportunity for me to focus. To reduce burnout. To step back into a narrower scope. They said it was what was best for everyone. I sat there nodding, because that was what I had trained myself to do. Inside, something went completely still. I asked one question. Just one. I asked what this meant for my growth. There was a pause. A quick glance exchanged between two people at the table. Then the answer came, carefully worded and completely empty. Something about revisiting development plans later in the year. Later. The meeting ended. People stood up. Laptops closed. Chairs scraped back. No one looked at me as they left. Eric lingered. He told me he hoped I understood. He said leadership trusted him to carry things forward and that my work had made that possible. He said this was not personal. That was the moment it finally hit me. I had built the ladder, and someone else was climbing it. I walked back to my desk in a fog, surrounded by the familiar hum of an office that suddenly felt foreign. I sat down, stared at my screen, and realized something terrifying. They did not need my loyalty anymore. And once you understand that, you start to see every past promise in a very different light. What I did next would decide whether I stayed the person they counted on, or finally became someone who counted himself. Pulling back was harder than burning out ever was. The first morning after that meeting, I sat in my car longer than usual before going inside. My body still wanted to rush in early, like it always had. My hands still itched to open my laptop and get ahead of problems that had not even surfaced yet. That instinct was baked into me now. Years of training myself to be useful on demand do not just disappear overnight. But I remembered the word absorbed. I remembered the way they talked about my future like it was a scheduling inconvenience. So I walked in at my scheduled time. Not early. On time. Nothing exploded. That surprised me. I did my assigned tasks. I answered emails that were directly addressed to me. I did not jump in when a conversation drifted toward a problem I knew how to solve. I stayed quiet in meetings unless someone asked me something directly. It felt wrong. Like I was breaking some unwritten law. The unexpected twist was how fast people noticed. By midweek, coworkers started stopping by my desk again. Not to thank me. To ask why something had not been handled yet. I told them calmly that it was outside my scope now. That it might be better directed to Eric. They looked confused, sometimes annoyed, like I was pretending not to understand the rules of the game. Eric noticed too. He called me into his office on Friday. He said the team was feeling my absence. He said things were slipping. He asked if I was disengaged. The word landed heavy, like an accusation. I told him I was doing exactly what had been decided, that my responsibilities had been narrowed, that I was focusing, just like leadership suggested. He frowned. He said that was not what they meant. That was the moment I realized something critical. The deal had never been mutual. The expectations were still there. The rewards were not. He asked me to step up again, just a little, just until things stabilized. He said it would show maturity, commitment. He said leadership was watching how I handled the change. I went back to my desk and sat there, staring at my hands. For the first time in my career, I seriously considered what would happen if I said no and meant it. That night, I went home and did something I had not done in years. I opened my resume. As I listed my accomplishments, a strange thing happened. The words on the screen looked impressive. Systems built. Crises handled. Projects saved. On paper, I looked invaluable. At work, I was treated like a convenience. That contrast shook me more than any meeting ever had. The following Monday, Eric sent me a calendar invite labeled urgent. No context. No agenda. Just a time and a room. I accepted it, already knowing that whatever was coming next would force a choice I could not undo. The urgent meeting turned out to be anything but subtle. When I walked into the room, Eric was already there, along with two people from leadership. Laptops open, coffee untouched. The energy was tense in a quiet, controlled way, like everyone had rehearsed their parts. They did not ask how I was doing. They went straight into the issue. A major internal initiative had been greenlit. High visibility, tight timeline, the kind of project that usually defined careers. As they spoke, my heart started beating faster, not from excitement, but from a strange sense of dread I could not explain yet. Then came the twist. They announced that Eric would be leading it. Full authority, direct access to executives. It was framed as a natural next step for him. Growth, trust, confidence in his leadership. I waited. Surely this was where they explained my role, my involvement, the reason I was in the room. What they said instead felt like the floor dropping out from under me. They told me I would be supporting the initiative as needed, advising, providing continuity, helping behind the scenes. The words were polite, almost kind, but the message was clear. This was not mine. I asked why I had not been considered to lead it. The room went still. One of them finally answered, choosing his words carefully. He said leadership saw me as too critical in my current capacity, that moving me into a visible role might disrupt stability. He said I was invaluable exactly where I was. There it was. I was too useful to promote. They needed me where I was because without me, things fell apart. And because things fell apart without me, they could not afford to move me. I nodded. Again, because that was what I had always done. After the meeting, Eric walked with me partway back to my desk. He told me he hoped I was not upset. He said he needed me on this, that my experience made him confident he could succeed. I realized then that he genuinely believed this was fair. That night, I sat in my car in the parking lot long after the engine cooled, staring at the building. I thought about every late night, every weekend email, every time I told myself this was how you earn trust. The truth settled in with terrifying clarity. My loyalty had built something strong, just not for me. I was not being overlooked by accident. I was being preserved, maintained, kept exactly where I was most useful to everyone else. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. The only question left was whether I was brave enough to stop being their foundation, even if it meant the whole structure might shake. Once you see the truth, pretending not to becomes exhausting. I did not quit right away. That would have been too dramatic, too satisfying in a way that let everyone else write the ending. Instead, something colder took over. Clearer. I stopped reacting and started observing. I watched how often my name came up only when something was on fire. I watched how Eric spoke with confidence built on work he never touched. I watched how leadership talked about loyalty like it was a renewable resource they could tap whenever needed. And I planned. I did my job. Cleanly. Professionally. Exactly as written. Nothing more. Nothing less. When people tried to slide work my way with a casual ask, I redirected them. When meetings ran long, I left when my calendar said to leave. I stopped explaining myself. The twist came faster than I expected. Problems piled up. Not catastrophic at first. Just enough to make people uncomfortable. The systems I used to quietly maintain started showing cracks. The processes I had patched with invisible effort began to fail in small, but noticeable ways. Eric started scrambling. He asked for help again, this time less polished, more urgent. He reminded me of everything we had built together. He said the team needed me. I listened. Then I told him I needed to think about my future. That was the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. I updated my resume at night, rewriting my story the way it should have been told all along. I reached out to old contacts. I took calls in my car during lunch. Every conversation reminded me of something I had forgotten. Out there, my skills were rare, valuable, desired. In here, they were exploited. One company moved fast, too fast. The role was a step up in every way that mattered. Title, pay, authority, respect. They asked why I was leaving my current job. I told them the truth, just not all of it. I said I had outgrown my role. The offer came on a Thursday afternoon. I sat at my desk staring at it, heart pounding, hands steady. I did not feel excited. I felt calm, like everything finally made sense. I drafted my resignation letter and saved it without sending. I wanted to sleep on it. To be sure, that night, Eric called me. Not emailed. Called. He said leadership was reconsidering things. He said maybe we had moved too fast. He hinted at possibilities. Future conversations. Adjustments. I thanked him and told him I would get back to him. I hung up and looked at the offer again. For the first time in years, the decision was not about loyalty. It was about clarity. Tomorrow, I would choose who I was really working for. And once I made that choice, there would be no going back. I sent the resignation letter at 6:47 the next morning. I remember the time because I sat there staring at the screen for a full minute after clicking send, waiting for something to happen inside me. Panic, regret, fear, anything dramatic. What I felt instead was quiet. The kind of quiet you only get after a long noise finally stops. Eric came to my desk within the hour. He did not sit down. He did not smile. He asked if we could talk. We went into a small conference room with glass walls. The kind where everyone can see you, but no one can hear what is being said. He told me leadership was surprised. He said the timing was not great. He said we could fix this. He asked what it would take for me to stay. That question landed differently than he expected. For years, I had been trying to earn something that should have been obvious. Respect, investment, growth. Now that I had one foot out the door, suddenly those things were negotiable. I asked him why none of this had been possible before. He did not have an answer. Not a real one. Just phrases. Budget cycles. Timing. Alignment. The same words I had been swallowing for years. He said they could talk about a raise. Maybe a new title. Maybe more visibility. He said leadership finally understood how much I did. Finally, I looked at him and realized something that locked everything into place. They did not value me. They valued what I absorbed for them. The stress, the risk, the gaps, the responsibility without authority. I made things easier for everyone else. And in return, they kept me exactly where I was most convenient. I told him I appreciated the offer. I told him I had already accepted another role. His shoulders dropped. He asked where. I did not tell him. The last 2 weeks passed strangely. People stopped asking me for favors once they realized I would not be there to carry things anymore. Leadership scheduled a farewell meeting and called me an unsung hero. They thanked me publicly for my dedication. Someone joked that they were going to feel my absence. I smiled. I shook hands. I packed my desk. On my final day, I walked out at 5 o'clock sharp. No late night. No last rescue. The building kept humming behind me, and for the first time, it was not my problem. The new job felt different immediately. Clear expectations. Clear boundaries. When I stayed late once out of habit, my new manager told me to go home. He said tomorrow would still be there. It took months to unlearn the reflex to overgive, to stop tying my worth to how much I could carry for others. But clarity does that. Once you see the pattern, you cannot mistake it for purpose again. Here is the truth I wish someone had told me earlier. Being dependable can make you indispensable to the wrong people. Being valuable does not mean you are valued. And loyalty, when it only flows one way, is not loyalty at all. It is convenience. I did not fail by working hard. I failed by believing effort alone would protect me. Now I know better. And I will never confuse usefulness with respect again.